My name is Kathy. Last Tuesday, I found myself standing outside a lawyer's office in Riverton, California, clutching a manila folder. It was thin enough to slide under a door, yet it felt as heavy as the weight of 16 years of lies. Inside, my stepmother, Carol, was telling the attorney that the will reading was strictly for heirs named in the will. I could hear her through the thick oak door, and the mocking laughter of my stepbrother, Jake, pierced through the silence. What Carol didn't know was that my father, Henry, had made a fateful phone call from his hospital bed. It wasn't to her or her children. It was to a woman Carol had never even heard of. That phone call was the reason I was holding this folder, a folder that was about to shatter the false narrative she'd constructed over the years. Let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up in a small, cozy house on Elm Street. The house had a unique charm, with its yellow clapboard exterior and blue shutters. There was a round porch where my father built a hammock for me when I was 10. Riverton was the kind of town where neighbors knew each other by name, and everyone left their doors unlocked. My father was a kind-hearted man. He owned a local bookstore, a place where the community gathered to share stories and ideas. He also started a local reading program for kids, hoping to instill a love for books in the younger generation. People in Riverton trusted him, just like you'd trust a friend who always remembers your birthday. My mother, Lily, was an artist. She painted beautiful landscapes and sold her work at local art fairs. She had a small garden in the backyard, filled with sunflowers. The whole house smelled like fresh paint and the sweet fragrance of sunflowers. On weekends, we'd have picnics in the garden, and my mother would tell me stories about the places in her paintings. But then, tragedy struck. My mother was diagnosed with cancer when I was 13. She fought bravely for a year, but in the end, she lost the battle. The last thing she said to me was, "Kathy, this house is full of love. Always remember that." At that time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. About 18 months after my mother's death, my father met Carol at a local charity event. Carol was tall and had a sharp tongue. She worked part-time at a beauty salon in the next town and had 2 children from a previous marriage, Jake and Mia. Jake was 15 and always seemed to be in a bad mood, while Mia was 10 and very shy. The town thought it was a good thing for my father to find love again. They said he deserved happiness after the loss of my mother. So when I was 15, my father and Carol got married, and they moved into our house. The changes started small. Carol said the sunflowers in the garden attracted too many bugs, so she had them all pulled out. She replaced my mother's paintings on the walls with generic art prints. She also converted my mother's art studio into a storage room, saying it was a waste of space. Jake took over my bedroom, saying he needed more space for his sports equipment. I was moved to a small attic room. Carol patted me on the back and said, "You'll like it up there. It's quiet and private." But I could hear Jake stomping around downstairs, and it felt like my world was being slowly taken away from me. My father tried to make things better. He'd suggest we go to the bookstore together, just the 2 of us, like we used to. But Carol would always find a way to stop us. She'd say, "Jake feels left out. You should take him with you." And my father, who never wanted to disappoint anyone, would give in. I started to feel like an outsider in my own home. At dinner, Carol would sit at the head of the table, the place where my mother used to sit. My father sat to her right, and I was pushed to the far end, next to the drafty window. Every time I tried to talk to my father alone, Carol would appear, asking what we were talking about. Any chance of a private conversation vanished like smoke. Jake made things even worse. He'd hide my art supplies, change the TV channel when I was watching something, and eat the snacks I'd set aside for myself. One day, at the breakfast table, he said, "This is my house now." Carol just laughed and said, "He's just joking, Kathy. Don't be so sensitive." As I got older, things didn't get any better. I graduated from high school, and Carol threw a small party. She invited Jake's friends and Mia's classmates, but not a single one of my friends. When I asked why, she tilted her head and said, "I didn't know who your friends were. You never told me." But I had told her multiple times. That night, as I stood in the backyard, Watching Jake's friends play around in the place where my mother's sunflowers used to be, I realized I didn't belong there anymore. The next morning, before sunrise, I wrote a letter to my father. I kept it short, saying, "Dad, I love you, but I can't stay where I don't fit. I'll be okay." I left it on his pillow and then took a bus to San Francisco. I didn't cry on the bus, but a few days later, when I was alone in a tiny apartment, I realized that no one was coming after me. Little did I know that my father had driven to the bus station that morning. He was 20 minutes too late. He stood in the empty parking lot, reading my letter over and over again until a kind-hearted clerk asked if he needed help. But Carol told the town a different story. She said I was ungrateful and that I'd left without a good reason. And the town, trusting Carol, believed her. In San Francisco, I started from scratch. I got a job at a small art gallery answering phones and filing paperwork. I learned the business by paying close attention, just like my father had taught me. I got my art dealing license at 22 and opened my own small gallery by the time I was 28. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I called my father every month at first, but the calls got shorter and shorter. Carol was always nearby, and I could hear her in the background, making it clear that the call should end. My father's voice got weaker each year, like a fading echo. I sent him letters and pictures of my gallery, but his replies got shorter and his handwriting shakier. 2 years before he died, I heard that my father was sick. Heart problems, they said. I called Carol and asked to visit, but she said, "Henry needs rest. Visitors will tire him out. The doctor said so." I called again and again, but every time I got the same answer, or his phone went to voicemail. My father, however, was making his own plans. In the gaps between Carol's watchful eye, when she went out for errands or to the beauty salon, he made that important phone call. He called an old friend, an attorney named Emily Reed. My father passed away on a Monday morning. Carol called me and informed me in a cold, business-like tone. "Your father passed this morning. The funeral is on Thursday. It's a small family gathering." She hung up before I could say a word. I drove 2.5 hours from San Francisco to Riverton. I was in a state of shock and anger. When I arrived at the church, I immediately noticed the arrangement Carol had made. The front row family pew was occupied by Carol, Jake, and Mia. I was directed to the guest seating. I walked towards the casket anyway. My father looked peaceful, like he was just taking a long nap. I reached out to touch his hand, but Jake stepped in front of me. "Mom said only family at the casket. You understand, right?" I stood there, my arm half extended, as 10 rows of Riverton residents watched in silence. I sat in the back pew and said goodbye from a distance. After the funeral, as I stood in the parking lot, a woman approached me. She was an older woman, with gray hair and a kind face. She introduced herself as Sarah, my father's nurse. She told me that my father had talked about me every single day. He'd kept a picture of me on his nightstand until Carol moved it. He tried to call me, but his phone was always misplaced. She also told me about the phone call he'd made to Emily Reed. My father had been angry, she said. He knew that Carol was trying to take everything, and he wanted to make things right. The next day, I drove to Emily's office. It was a small, old-fashioned office above a coffee shop. Emily was in her 60s, with a warm smile and a no-nonsense attitude. She hugged me and then sat me down to tell me what my father had done. My father had called her 14 months ago, while Carol was out. He'd said that a woman he didn't trust had brought him papers to sign while he was on pain medication. He wanted to make a new will, one that would ensure I got what was rightfully mine. Emily had driven to the hospital twice. The second time, she brought 2 independent witnesses and arranged for a cognitive evaluation. My father passed with flying colors. He knew exactly what he was doing. She slid a document across the desk. It was a new will, leaving the house and 60% of his estate to me. The rest was to go to the local reading program he'd started. Carol was given a reasonable monthly stipend, just enough to live on but not enough to control everything. Jake and Mia were not mentioned. Now, back at the lawyer's office in Riverton, I watched as the attorney, Mr. Thompson, opened the folder. He read through the document slowly, his eyes widening as he realized the significance. Mrs. Anderson, he said to Carol, this appears to be a second will, executed after the one I currently have. It includes a cognitive evaluation and affidavits from witnesses. Carol's face turned pale. Her perfect smile started to crack. This is a forgery, she exclaimed. She's trying to steal my husband's estate. Jake jumped in, shouting, we'll sue. This is ridiculous. But I remained calm. I knew the truth was on my side. Mr. Thompson said he would need to verify the documents, and the will reading was suspended. Over the next few days, the news spread around Riverton. Jake started telling everyone that I had forged the will, but people started to ask questions. If the will was a forgery, why hadn't the lawyer rejected it right away? And why was Emily Reed, a well-respected attorney, involved? As the truth started to come out, people in Riverton began to see Carol in a different light. They remembered how my father had always asked about me and how Carol had always seemed to get in the way. A few days later, Mia came to see me at my motel room. She was carrying a small box. I found this in Dad's study, she said. Mom never touched it. She said it was full of old papers. I opened the box. Inside was a picture of me and my father at a local fair when I was 8. There were also some of my old drawings and a letter. The letter was from my father. He wrote that he'd driven to the bus station that morning but was too late. He said he'd never been the same since that day and that he was sorry.
I thanked Mia.
It was the first time someone from that family had done something right. The probate process took 11 weeks. Emily and Mr. Thompson worked hard to ensure that the new will was recognized. In the end, the judge signed the order and the house, 60% of the estate, and control of the reading program were transferred to me. Carol was given her monthly stipend, but she had lost the battle. Jake was arrested for causing damage to the house when he found out he wouldn't get what he wanted. I decided not to press charges, but I made it clear that he was not welcome near the house. I didn't sell the house on Elm Street. Instead, I renovated it. I replanted the sunflowers in the backyard, and the house once again smelled like the sweet fragrance of sunflowers. I reopened my mother's art studio and turned the house into a community art space. I still live in San Francisco, but I visit Riverton once a month. Each time I drive there, the road seems a little shorter. I've finally found my way back, not just to the house, but to the love and memories that were hidden for so long. It took 16 years, but I've learned that sometimes the best journeys are the ones where you finally stop running and face the truth.